Hi there, this is the third video on Gorgias, and I'm going to use this PowerPoint. You can get a copy of this below here. Let's situate ourselves first. I think that's important. We've been looking at the first part of the Gorgias. If you look in the side, there's things called the Stephanos numbers, and it's 447a to 466a. So this comprises most of the conversation between Gorgias and Socrates, and a little bit of the conversation with Polus. What has been established? Well, let's do this, and you can skip this if you think you know it. It's a good review. So the sole purpose of rhetoric is to persuade others about the just or the unjust. And you can take, when Plato says the just or the unjust, that's another way of saying about right and wrong, about what to do, particularly in the city. So if we're in a political situation trying to figure out what to do next, for example, like what to do about COVID, that's where the rhetorician comes in and helps make the case. Rhetoric, Socrates and Gorgias both agree, is persuasive but not instructive about right and wrong. So this is an important point for Socrates. So rhetoric produces belief, not knowledge. And belief is being used here in a very technical sense here. So he means something like only belief, or he might even mean false belief, or at least ungrounded belief. We, of course, believe the things we know, but calling knowledge just a belief understates the reality there. I don't just believe 2 plus 2 equals 4. I know that. Gorgias claims, furthermore, that rhetorical oration can convince a crowd on almost any subject, though the orator has no expertise, in other words, is ignorant of any subject. He even claims, Gorgias again, that no expert in any given field would be more convincing on the subject of their profession in front of a crowd than a rhetorician with no such applied ability. And by crowd, we mean people who are not knowledgeable in the subject. So we can say, in short, rhetoric is an example of the ignorant being more convincing among the ignorant than experts in the subject. That should call us up a little bit. It's a little bit of a concern here. If somebody who doesn't know anything about, let's say, medicine or mathematics could convince other people about medicine better than someone who does know about it, then that's a pretty scary kind of thing. It's a pretty powerful sort of thing. And that's why one of the things that the dialogue gets into after this, which we'll talk about next, is what would be an appropriate use of power. Gorgias also claims that orators can use their skills unjustly, but unjust orators should themselves be blamed for that and not their teacher. He gets himself into trouble here when he also claims that if his pupils don't come to him already just, he would teach them about justice. So that's the contradiction that Socrates brings up about in the dialogue. In response to Polus, finally, Socrates claims that rhetoric is not a craft, but what he calls a knack or a routine. The difference is that a knack uses pleasure in order to create an impression or image of the good in its hearers. A true craft aims at producing a real benefit or good in its hearers and would forsake other means, including quick gratification, in order to accomplish its goals. Oratory is like pastry baking compared to medicine, a false good. Crafts without exception are rational and good, while routines aim to please and gratify and ignore the good. And this is why Socrates says rhetoric is basically a kind of flattery. Okay, so those are the points. As far as the dialogue goes, the next thing is to look at what happens next. Is there's going to be 2 objections, and we'll pick this up later on. But what I want to talk about today is to try to take this maybe to a slightly different level and give you a sense of what I think might be going on here with Plato and with what we should be doing to figure out problems in our communities. Okay, so let me start with a proposal about community decision making. In other words, what we might call politics. So here's what I would think might be a simple, an acceptable, and a commendable way to do it. When faced with a problem or a decision to make, wise people who have studied and know the truth about reality and the good and have a disinterested love for wisdom should get together and think and discuss the issue and figure out what to do about it. Now they know what is wisest and best. They then teach everyone else who hasn't participated in the process what they've learned. Now everyone knows what to do, and they go out and do it. Things could always go wrong when people are trying to do something, but at least as far as a decision-making process, what's the best way to do things? What could be better than this? I mean, is someone going to maintain that, well, I'd rather have unwise people looking into this, people who don't know anything about what to do and what's right and wrong and what's good or bad. I'd rather have people who are interested in certain things. So special interest groups, we call them nowadays. They should be making the decisions. Well, they'll just favor their own group or their own side, and that just doesn't lead to any sort of acceptable situation. So this looks pretty hard to knock down. And I think this would be Socrates, not Socrates here, but Plato's view. This would be the best way to go about this. So in another book, there's a pretty famous quote. Plato says, "Until philosophers are kings, and the kings and princes of this world have the spirit and power of philosophy, and political greatness and wisdom meet in one, and those commoner natures who pursue either to the exclusion of the other are compelled to stand aside, cities will never have rest from their evils, nor the human race, as I believe, and then only will this our state have a possibility of life and behold the light of day." Now, this can be kind of silly if you think about philosophers as people like me, Dr. Glovienka, people in academics. Why would we want them in charge of things? But that's not how Plato uses the word philosophers. Remember, for him, a philosopher is a wise person who knows the truth about the good and the true and the beautiful and loves it. Okay? Philosophos, a lover of wisdom, a friend of wisdom, and wants that truth and good to be directive in his or her life and in the life of the community. Now let's compare this to what seems to be rising up from the Gorgias about how things actually happen. So I call this slide, How Athens and Probably Us Actually Make Decisions. When faced with a problem or a decision to make, orators who openly admit, remember that's what happened in the Gorgias, that they have no knowledge or expertise about what is good, but have the skill of persuading anyone about anything, convince others who also don't know about the good to follow a certain course of action. Now everyone has a plan about what to do, at least they're convinced about what to do, but no one knows if their plan is good or beneficial, not even the people who convinced them of it in the first place. Remember, we defined oratoric as the ignorant people convincing other ignorant people about what to do. Seems crazy. So everyone proceeds thinking they know, because they've been persuaded into this, but they are really completely ignorant of the matter. Other things might go wrong, and they might, in spite of this, actually have chosen a good solution, but it seems pretty hard to defend this as a legitimate, healthy way to go about making our decisions. So maybe that's a little bit of a sense, at least in my mind, what Plato's trying to get at here, and his understanding of what philosophy can and maybe should be doing in our communities. Let's add a little bit more to this mix. Remember, we talked about both intellectual and affective aspects of the philosopher. So that means that the philosopher should know things, should have knowledge about what things are, particularly knowledge about the true and the good, and should have this character that loves that in a disinterested way. Now, if you think about it, that creates four kinds of people that might be existing in any society. And this matrix is meant to show that. So the four people would be people who know the good and the true and love the good and the true disinterestedly. So this is what Plato would call true philosophers. Okay, and then moving to the left over here, the right, sorry, people who know the good and the true, but don't love the good and the true disinterestedly. I guess these would be just philosophers, not true philosophers, but philosophers in some sense of the word, because they have this knowledge. Then you got down at the bottom, you got the people who don't know the good and the true, but love the good and the true disinterestedly. How did they get there? Well, maybe they were raised well. Okay, so they have an orientation, they're good people, but they just don't know what to do. And then we have the people who don't know the good or the true at all and don't love it either. Okay, so thinking a little bit about each of these types of people, the philosophers, well, we've already argued that these are the people that should do the work of figuring out the good and showing others what it is and why it is that way. They should teach everyone. The people who don't know the good but at least love it, these are the people that are set up to move into knowledge of the good. So these people are well disposed to doing the right. They've been raised well. And if they are capable intellectually and there's time, they should be taught. Then we got the people who know the good and the true, but don't love the good and the true disinterestedly. So these people, if they exist, are going to be a problem, as they have no motivation to do the right thing, even though they know it. They will only act if it stands to benefit them. And then you got these people at the bottom, which are certainly a big problem if these people exist. They're going to be a danger because they're ignorant and they don't care. And an ignorant person who doesn't care about society, themselves, or the good is only going to cause trouble. Wonder where Euthyphro would fit in here. Good question, huh? So what about the orator? Well, people who know the good, they wouldn't be orators. They would be true philosophers. Socrates seems to argue like a philosopher wouldn't use oratory because they could teach. But if we have people who don't know the good but love the good, they could be, could we trust them? If they trust philosophers, trust what they're being told, okay, they might be willing to convince people, even though they don't really know for themselves what the good are. And this is, I think, part of the issue here. We got these people who don't know. That's what Gorgias says he is. What about your moral character? So if you don't know the good, but you're in a good person, well, then we could probably live with you. But if you don't know the good and you're a bad person, this is what Socrates asked Gorgias. What about those unjust orators? Well, so I put down at the bottom, those down people at the bottom would be the unjust pupils. And Gorgias admits oratory can be used unjustly, so we need to find a way to keep the orators in check if we're going to allow them in our city. Okay? And we certainly don't want orators to people who know the good but don't love it, so they would be more inclined to do things because it would benefit them. Now, I don't think Gorgias is that. I think Gorgias is a good person. He seems to want to be just, and he's the sort of person that we could trust to the extent that he's got good intentions. Now, we can't trust him to the extent that he's ignorant about what he's doing. That could still be a danger. So those people, at least in Plato's mind, would need to have a guide, someone like the philosopher. Okay. One other possibility, okay, when faced with a problem of a decision make, we can have wise people who have studied and know the truth and want to do the good, study it, figure it out, maybe a Socratic discussion, and then they know what is best. And then they can teach those who are willing and able to learn but haven't participated in the process. And then the people who don't want to learn, well, why don't we say, and Socrates doesn't rule this out, we could hire rhetoricians to persuade the others to accept what the wise people have figured. Maybe this is a compromise. Now, everyone agrees about what to do. Some actually know why they should do that. Others have been persuaded into doing it, and we're all on the same page. So maybe that would be a solution that's not proposed in this dialogue. The dialogue seems to suggest that rhetoricians are a problem, but maybe they aren't. So what about a modern application? Well, what is more like decision-making in the U.S.? So I'm going to it's controversial, the example of COVID. What to do in the middle of the pandemic, okay? And what actually we do. We got a bunch of people telling us what to do. We got a lot of people saying, well, they know, we should believe them. People who question them often get shut down in our society. There's a lot of not even rhetoricians persuading people, but just simply by use of force. I think we're very far from having philosophers, again, not people like me and Govienka, but people who know the good and love the good, making decisions for us. We may never get there. And certainly the whole thing seems very undemocratic, and I agree to that. So what do you think? Is Plato right? Is his view workable? This is something I want you to leave a comment for me in the forum for this reading. You'll find the forum when you get out of this lesson. And here I just want you to think about this and to react in an intelligent way about this proposal that I think we are getting here from Plato, if I've been at all clear. Okay, the last thing we'll look is to move on to look at the two objections that I talked about, and we'll find that in the next video.